Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We are going to be able to dip into the pool of why fasting is so incredibly powerful, irrespective of if you're trying to lose weight. And it's going to be around a study that came out in the Atherosclerosis Thrombosis Vascular Biology Journal in April of 2026. Sleep-aligned extended overnight fasting improves nighttime and daytime cardiometabolic function. Incredible. Went and found this study after I heard Dr. Rhonda Patrick speaking on the Dr. Andrew Huberman podcast, and just love her, love him. She just makes everything so simple. So went and grabbed the article. We're going to dive into it and put our Fasting for Life nuance and spin on it, how we adopt a fasting lifestyle. So if you are new to the podcast, welcome in. Going to be a fun conversation today. We're going to give you actionable steps of things and reasons and why and know-how behind why we truly believe fasting is a weight loss and health superpower. If you want to know more about Tommy, myself, our journeys, how fasting transformed our lives, and now the countless hundreds and thousands of people that we've helped along the way, head back to episode 0, episode 1. Give it a listen. It'll give you some insight into who we are and why we do what we do week in and week out with the podcast and the resources on the website and the challenges and the coaching. It transformed our lives, and we want to share that with you as we are on this journey with you. If you're a long-term listener, welcome in. Thank you so much for the likes, rates, shares, reviews. Just so grateful that we've amassed 5 million downloads and just hundreds of thousands of people listening to the power of fasting. So, Tommy, I want to give a shout out to Stardust_361. Do you have that up, or do you want me to do the shout out?
Yeah, I certainly do. So Stardust said, great information, 5 stars, wonderful podcast, lots of valuable information given to us each week. I've been fortunate enough to join 2 of their fasting challenges and found great success with it. And I love to binge on the podcast while I work, which keeps me hyped about fasting. Thank you, gentlemen, for everything you do for the fasting community. I'd give y'all a 100-star review if I could. Signed, Gloria. Thank you very much, Gloria, for your very, very kind, thoughtful words. So glad that you joined those challenges and had success in those 2. Those are a lot of fun, and we see a lot of accelerated results in those challenges too. So hopefully welcoming you back to another one at some point soon. Yeah.
Now, Gloria, if it's the Gloria I remember, right? We've probably had a few Glorias over 40 plus challenges now that we've done.
All right.
But I think I know you just by the way you gave us the shout out. So thank you so much for the, I remember you. So thank you so much for the kind words. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us.
Yeah.
So let's dive in. So big picture here, fasting, so many of us come to fasting for weight loss, right?
Sure.
And then we find the additional benefits of how we feel and how we sleep and how we manage stress and how we show up in our day-to-day life as dads and husbands and wives and grandparents. And so the power of fasting is so incredibly rooted in the experience, like the N=0 or the N=1, type experience where you start doing it. And then all you want to do is talk about it, and people notice that you're showing up different, or you're shrinking, right? Or you lost some weight, or you've deflamed, or whatever it is. But there's so many additional benefits to fasting outside of weight loss, and that's why standing in your kitchen Father's Day 2019, and I'm like, what have you been doing, man? You look great. Like, put me on the couch, degree in psychology, master's in physiology. I'm like, what are you doing? Because I've tried, I was struggling and just couldn't figure out why the calorie in, calorie out, eat less, move more, CrossFit, cardio, macro, counting, tracking wasn't working for me. And I was feeling tired and inflamed and just frustrated with the process, as so many of us have had. And then we read Dr. Fung's obesity code book, and it was like, wow, okay, so there's something more here than just weight loss, right? There's the physiology component. And what we love to do is nerd out on the physiology, but then give you actionable things that you can do. So big picture, in summary for this study, it's sleep-aligned extended overnight fasting improves nighttime and daytime cardiometabolic function. So Dr. Rhonda Patrick said it so eloquently, this will decrease your cardiovascular risk, your chance of heart attacks and strokes, by simply moving your mealtime to greater than 3 hours before bed. So we'll get about primary outcomes and secondary outcomes, Tommy, but in summary, extended overnight fasting aligned with sleep. So we talk a lot about stress and sleep, and we'll talk about cortisol and stress hormones and all that when we go through this today.
Yeah.
Significantly improved several cardiometabolic health markers, including nighttime autonomic nervous system balance, decreases in diastolic blood pressure and heart rate, so increasing your heart rate variability, and glucose regulation during the night and the following morning.
Yeah.
So sleep-aligned TRE or fasting. Now, this group didn't do fasting during the day. We'll get into the nitty-gritty details. All they did was move. Tommy, you have the numbers there for the average time to their last meal to bedtime.
Yeah, basically the control group was an average of 2.5 hours between their last meal and their bedtime, and the intervention group was an average of 4.5 hours. So this would be the difference between having your dinner at, let's say, 5:30 with a 10 o'clock bedtime versus 7:30 with a 10 o'clock bedtime. So very simple shift, and one of those ones that we might just kind of overlook or assume wouldn't move the needle all that much. But essentially for this group, they were anywhere between around a 12 to a 16-hour fast. But what they were doing was wrapping the fast around their sleep in a way that they just moved this one lever without making any other changes to calories or macros or anything else. And then they're seeing these substantial cardiometabolic improvements.
Yep. So there were two groups. It was a parallel arm trial in 39 overweight obese adults, 35 to 75 years old, comparing that extended overnight fasting aligned with sleep versus the habitual eating group or the control group. So about 15-hour fasts and about 12-hour fasting controls. You already mentioned the hours, 4.5 hours before bed for the extended overnight fast group and about 2.5 hours in the control group. So really just a 2-hour delta.
Yep.
That's
all it took.
That's not that big.
Yeah.
And that's a small lever. So the translation here is same food, same calories, same activity, but shift when you stop eating so that your fast wraps around your sleep. And we talk so much about how important sleep is for proper metabolic health, insulin regulation, glucose regulation, hunger hormones, and ultimately weight loss, health, and longevity.
Yeah.
So no change. This is what I love about the testing. No change in total calories, macros, activity, or sleep opportunity. And then both groups, which I love, this taps into the conversations we've had about circadian biology and light and the blue light epidemic that we're in. Both groups dimmed lights less than 100 lux for 3 hours before bed. Now, that's something that we practice here in our household, not with these bright lights that we have here for the recording, but we have a very dim lamp in our bathroom. We have red lights and circadian lights in the kids' rooms, the night lights. We have the red light that we do as a family most nights before bed. So just trying to dim the lights and get us ready for sleep. So I love that this was added in both groups, just as kind of like a protecting the sleep architecture, which speaks a lot to what we coach on and what we believe is truly part of the weight loss equation.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a little bit of an identity behind like how you look at sleep. And I think sometimes that can kind of get in the way with a little bit of cognitive dissonance for how we think about how important our sleep and our sleep cycle and protecting our sleep is. So if you don't identify as someone who protects your sleep at this point, that was me. Yeah, that was me too, right? I wore it as a badge of honor, and I know you did too.
Yep.
Where you could operate with a whole lot less sleep. And
I hear my dad saying, "I'll sleep when I'm dead."
I'll sleep when I'm dead, right? I've said that. I've said
That's
that
a good
1,000
plan.
times. Yeah. You don't need to accelerate the aging process in order to maximize what your body can do and your productivity and all of these kind of things. What we find is actually the opposite when we're a little more protective of our sleep with something like a small lever, like moving our last meal 2 hours different, 2 hours earlier before bed. Then what we get is this optimal rest, this optimal parasympathetic cycle within the body, to where we're actually prepared for the next day. Our growth hormone response is better. Our testosterone as men is better. Our hormone balance is better the next day, because we have the ability for our parasympathetic system to go into the right cycle early on in the evening time, so that we're not disrupting that normal cycle because of that late meal. So that late meal is so much more disruptive to the rest and digest, the sleep and repair cycle. And
Yep.
it's really just highlighted, in this study, where we didn't change anything else. We just moved this small lever, but we can see all of these cardiometabolic benefits.
So I'll share a personal story. My wife and I went out for our anniversary recently, went to Taste of Texas. The only time they had was an 8:15 reservation, because we only booked the trip like the night away, like 2 weeks ahead of time. And Taste of Texas books out months in advance.
Yeah.
Got a gift card, shout out. And just awesome. But I'll share that in a second. But what were you just speaking about there, Tommy? And we'll talk about what the primary and secondary outcomes were. Is the timing component. So the clinical nuance here is the group controlled light and sleep. So the signal is timing of eating, not like a generic lifestyle overhaul.
Yeah.
Right? So same
Right.
food, same calories, same activity. They weren't fasting during the day, right? So minimize all of that. So we're going to apply this later for folks that are trying to get into fasting, or folks that are already fasting with a weight loss or maybe maintenance goal now. Like, what are the other benefits and things that I can do to reduce that, underpinning insulin relationship to cardiometabolic issues, heart disease, lifestyle, chronic lifestyle conditions, like that connection point. What can I do to insulate? Well, simply keeping one of your pillars or your foundational tools in your tool belt of increasing that time of last meal before bed. But the primary and secondary outcomes, Tommy, we have something I've never seen in a research article before was we have dippers and non-dippers.
Yeah.
So they were looking at diastolic blood pressure and the nighttime dip, right?
Yep.
So that's one of the primary outcomes was nighttime dipping. Did we see that decrease? And then the Matsuda index, the insulin sensitivity from a 3-hour OGTT, which is an oral glucose tolerance test. So you drink the stuff, they monitor your blood, and your post-ingestion kind of area under the curve of what your blood sugar is doing, how high it goes, how long it stays elevated, how long it takes to get back down to baseline. So those were the two, and that's really looking at insulin sensitivity, which is the action of insulin or the amount of insulin that's produced by our body to handle the intake of food, which I think gets lost a lot. We talk a lot about insulin resistance, so we'll get to that. Those are the two primary outcomes. The secondary outcome was nighttime heart rate. And I'll connect the dots with a real life example here in my story in just a sec. So your heart rate, and then HRV, we're a Whoop family.
Yep.
So heart rate variability, nighttime cortisol, now you're crazy. I don't know how you put both of those on the same wrist. But anyway, he has it, for you guys just listening, he has his watch and his Whoop on the same side. I would have to cut off my arm. I wouldn't be able to do that. Anyway, nighttime cortisol, because we talk about stress and that cortisol response and that awakening response and what it does with blood sugar. And then we've got fasting glucose and insulin, and then the OGTT, glucose and insulin and sleep architecture. So primary outcomes, are you a dipper or non-dipper when it comes to blood pressure?
Yeah.
And then what is your insulin sensitivity with the 3-hour OGTT test? So this is where I want to connect a couple of those dots and how it shows up in real life. Went to dinner. I knew that it was going to be, I'm glad we had a hotel room and we could sleep in the next day. Because I knew that I was giving up some control of protecting my sleep.
Of course.
Right? If you would have told me 2 decades ago that I'd be a guy who wants to be in bed early, stay in and get up early and go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, you would have put me in a box and I would have freaked out.
All right.
Like cornering a raccoon. Like I would have just lost my stuff. So it's interesting though. So we went to dinner, ate great, went to the salad bar, only had one of their, famous rolls, like had a great steak, made some great food choices, felt great about it, protein paste.
Nice.
No alcohol. I did not have dessert. I'm not a big dessert person. My wife did. Actually ate it on the way home back to the hotel. And that night, like I could sitting at dinner, I said to my wife, I'm like, I can feel my heart rate, like my heartbeat. And my heart rate was still relatively low, but I could just feel it. It was like thump, 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 like right, like that thud.
Yeah.
So we go home, crank the air down, sleep, get a good 8 hours of sleep, which I'm typically about a 6:45 to 7:30. I'm working on increasing that with my sleep efficiency. But I woke up a couple of times, kind of felt restless, woke up, was like, oh, wow, 8 hours, man. Let me check my Whoop. My heart rate stayed up, and it took the entire night for it to drop. Now, compare that to a night where I don't eat before bed, right? My heart rate drops and stays down that whole night, and my heart rate variability goes up. So I knew that, but I could literally feel it in real time. Thinking back to my, date nights with drinks and food, I would go to bed hot.
Yep.
I would feel my heart rate. I would wake up multiple times. So this dipper, non-dipper, that's a real life example of what the dipping or the dipperness feels like.
Yeah.
When you make this change and you pull this lever, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because the dipping phenomenon is one that it's like at this point, and with Whoop data or some other wearable data, it's like you can see it and intuitively understand it. But it's interesting to see it like talked about in a as a primary or secondary outcome for a study like this, because it's really important, and it determines how you feel all through the night, your likelihood to wake up in the middle of the night, and then also the quality and the quantity of your energy the next day, because it determined your sleep quality during that night. And to your point too about sleep efficiency, this is also a big determinant of your sleep efficiency from night to night. And as we talk about fast cycling and fast stacking here, we are not looking at just random fasting. We look at fasting as a lifestyle, because one day leads to the next. And so one set of food choices, one set of sleep habits, one night of sleep leads into the next day, and my metabolic efficiency the next day, my insulin sensitivity the next day.
Your ability to stick to a fast due to hunger cues the next day.
Yeah, your cravings that may or may not be under your control or out of control the next day, that then determine the likelihood of your success on your fast the next day, and one day to the next. And so when we look at this and we see this 3.5 to almost 5% improvement for the extended overnight fasters in that diastolic blood pressure dipping and in the heart rate dipping as well, that's huge. And just from having that earlier meal, that adds up over time. It adds up for cardiometabolic risk, as well as it eventually helps determine what's happening with the scale too, because your body is either a more efficient fat burner or a less efficient fat burner based on the quality and efficiency of your sleep. And one last thing to add is that a chunk of the extended overnight fasters actually, during the course of this study over a matter of weeks, went from non-dippers into the dipper statuses just from bringing those meals a couple of hours earlier every single night for a matter of a few weeks. And that's something that I noticed in myself. I didn't have the Whoop data to prove it at that time, but there was a shift. There was a shift early on. Yeah, and then a couple of years later, you brought me into the Whoop world, and so then I had data, but I was already a dipper at that point. But a couple of years before then, I absolutely was not.
Yeah, so let's talk about exact outcomes. So what changed despite no weight loss? So there was no meaningful change in calories, BMI, or waist over the 7.5 weeks. The adherence was over 90%. So that's fantastic.
Wow.
In both the light before bed, the circadian biology, sleep stuff, and the 2-hour delta of moving their meal earlier, minimum 3 hours before bed. So the nighttime heart rate dropped more, 3 beats more on average in the fasting, the extended overnight fasting group. It increased their autonomic, parasympathetic, sympathetic balance, right? So it decreased the sympathetic and increased the parasympathetic. So it gave the body that chance to rest. So it had better tone, which relates to cortisol in the morning. We'll talk about that in a second. Diastolic blood pressure decreased in the extended overnight fast group, but not in the controls, to what you were just speaking about. So about 5 percentage points better. And half of the group went from non-dippers to dippers, which is what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Which is a great lever. Now I wonder, we didn't talk about this while we were prepping for the episode, but I was just thinking about that whole time change when we fall back and spring ahead.
Yeah.
And when we spring ahead, there is data and research and articles, and I see it all over, it hits the news cycle for a couple of days when we spring ahead, and there is a direct increase in cardiovascular heart attacks and strokes when we have this outdated, antiquated, in my opinion, spring forward time change phenomenon that happens. So I wonder if this is speaking to part of that mechanism, in my opinion, that increased cardiovascular risk, or how we can prevent that, or how we can pull levers to decrease the stress on our cardiovascular system.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. A sudden change in timing means that you could potentially see a difference there in the outcomes. It's when we start looking at the timing again, like as part of your identity, this is a way that you can start to make improvements based on this data. You could say, okay, do I want the outcome? If I want the outcome, which would be a better cardiometabolic risk profile, then all I have to do is make some small shifts. I don't even have to necessarily get them right all of the time. But if I put a little bit of effort behind this and go, okay, what does my latest meal usually look like? What does my evening window usually look like?
Oh, I'll just do dinner OMAD.
Yeah, dinner OMAD. And I think this is one of the reasons why when we started the podcast, we were very adamant that dinner OMAD was a really, really good tool, and it still is. However, there's a reason why it's not just the perfect tool, and it definitely shouldn't be your only tool. Yeah, and the reason why is because it can get late, especially as you get more and more into fasting and maybe some slippage comes in or whatever the case may be. It could potentially get later, and that's obviously worse for our cardiometabolic health and also our insulin sensitivity. But then also we can be finding ways to put more and more food into that opportunity, or it could be a slippery slope.
Like if it's your only meal of the day and it's your biggest meal later in the evening, right?
Right. And then it could be very easy to justify, hey, a bigger meal than you might want or you might feel comfortable with, or that might help protect your sleep. And so whereas if you had a lunch OMAD or a breakfast OMAD, you would have all that time to go through and digest that food, and your cardiometabolic profile would be much better, because of that. So if dinner OMAD is a big tool for you, then this is really, really speaking to you. Like you and I, Scott, we used a lot of dinner OMADs, and still do, but at the same time with a different perspective than we had 5 years ago on them, because it really is it's so very important to protect that sleep, even if it means just small concessions, because it could be a little annoying, like lifestyle wise. You might want to have a later meal, but at the same time, every earlier meal that you have is going to be beneficial. So you don't have to get it right every single day necessarily, but the more times you get it right, the more benefit you're going to get from it.
So let's talk about that next morning, right? Because if we're going to set the stage, the next fast the following day is set by the food decisions in your fasting efforts on the day prior.
Right.
So we always say moving the meal earlier is going to make that next day better by protecting sleep, because you're going to have better blood sugar regulation, better insulin sensitivity, less hunger, better stress response. So you're making better decisions when life's, as we like to say.
Yeah.
Right?
Speaking of the stress response, did you mention the stress response in the study yet?
No, not yet.
You did.
Not yet.
Okay.
Let me go find that. I had it up, and then I think we shifted the conversation. So it is a 12% reduction in cortisol.
Just from this 2 hour earlier
Just
meal.
from this small delta of changing your dinner. Yep.
Yeah.
Cortisol is the stress response hormone. It's also the hormone that wakes you up in the morning.
Yeah.
Right. But if you have sleep issues, brain fog, chronic fatigue, chronic inflammation, cortisol and your HPA axis, your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, your adrenals produce that stress response. Now, we need cortisol, right? It gets demonized out there. But it's just showing that you're taking that physiological or perception or physical, emotional, chemical stress. You're taking all of that, and you're dropping that stress response. I don't know about you, but when I'm stressed, where do I want to go?
Kitchen.
I want to go to the pantry.
Right.
I want to get me some ice cream. Right.
Right.
I want to the relationship with food component, that stress response, that emotional response to that food comes into play. So yeah, 12% decrease just by this small change.
And when cortisol is higher, our sleep suffers. We're not in as restful,
wired and tired.
The sleep cycles cannot progress the same way. That's when sleep efficiency goes down. So if we can get cortisol levels lower as we're getting into our nighttime, our restful sleep stages, then we have the ability for that delta to really be even greater whenever we have our natural cortisol rhythm that kicks in the morning to help get us up and out of bed, rather than it already being elevated from the night before. And that's hugely beneficial.
Yeah. So let's talk about that next morning, right?
Okay.
So we already talked about the dippers to non-dippers to dippers, the protection around the sleep. So in the metabolic component here is really where we're talking about, putting two things in the primary position: the timing, right, and the cardiometabolic outcomes. So we didn't see the scale move, and then interestingly enough, fasting glucose, fasting insulin, HOMA-IR, and Matsuda index, so all of the insulin, gold standard insulin tests, and blood sugar tests, did not significantly differ between the two groups. But, and there's a big but, during the 3-hour Matsuda insulin sensitivity test, that 3-hour oral glucose tolerance test, average post-load glucose, so postprandial, post-meal, fell in the extended overnight fast group and rose in the control group.
Wow.
So at the 60-minute mark, glucose was significantly lower in the earlier dinner group. And the 30-minute insulin was lower in that same group. And the 30-minute insulogenic index, so the beta cell response, the cells that make the insulin in your pancreas, was improved versus the controls. This is it right here, the key. More efficient early phase insulin response without oversecretion of insulin. If you're metabolically not flexible and your body doesn't know what to do with this glucose floating around in your bloodstream, and it's not allowing you to shuttle it into the cells or tap into those long-term fat stores, we want to control that insulin response.
Right.
Because when insulin's high, you can't burn fat. You can't get the scale moving. You can't lose the stubborn belly weight, right?
Even with the same calories. Your body, something else happens with the calories.
So you didn't lose weight in this group, but the night mode, air quotes, got healthier, calmer heart, better blood pressure rhythm, decreased cardiovascular risk, and a sharper, more efficient insulin response to carbs in the morning, all while their sleep stayed consistent.
Beautiful. When you look at CGM data, so this study is really interesting, because what it's doing really is, for everybody out there listening who doesn't wear a wearable, like a device that's actually looking at your sleep and sleep cycle and sleep
you don't
efficiency.
need it, right?
Right. You don't necessarily have to have it, but it's really interesting, and it can definitely confirm some positive changes that you do. It can reinforce some of those things, but not everybody has one of those. And the same thing with a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. It can be really helpful. It can show you, it can highlight some of the blind spots in some of your lifestyle choices. It can also help, kind of shift some of the things that you do, or some of the ways that you think about
some of the decisions you make. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And your individual response to them. But this study really just highlights what you would eventually probably learn for yourself by wearing a wearable or a CGM. But we can see it right here in this data, and this is why I really like this study, because I wish this study existed years ago, because this is one of those things where it's easy, especially if you are careful with your macros and are careful with your calories, or you're
protein,
always prioritizing
pacing, hydrating,
protein,
minerals, all that stuff.
Your fasting time is good. It can still feel like, the meal timing shouldn't matter all that much. What's the difference between an earlier dinner and a later dinner, that kind of thing? Because it just doesn't feel like that big of a movement. And oftentimes sometimes it's our ego that makes us feel like we have to change a whole lot in order to assume that we're going to get a big outcome, a big benefit from it. And this study really highlights that's really not the case with respect to dinner timing.
Yeah. So just the kind of shift here is like, the sleep aligned extended overnight fasting versus just like generic TRE or intermittent fasting, right? So we're really upgrading that night mode to make the next day easier and more efficient and more able for you to stay consistent with your fasting efforts. So it's more about metabolic timing than it is like caloric intake timing, I guess, if that makes sense. So couple of limitations, right? This was about a 7.5 week study. I would expect to see some of, if you added some protein-based meals and some fasting for life kind of foundational habits in there, and you had some, a weekly extended fast, or you had some, TRE or IF foundational days combined with this small lever, I would expect those blood sugar markers to move, just because all of the studies we've done have shown that when you do TRE. So it's really the biggest takeaway. So if we're talking about people that are managing blood sugar related issues or cardiovascular risk issues, right? Mm-hmm. Cardiovascular health problems already. This should be a big motivator to get you into the fasting world or to stay consistent with some of those foundational efforts. Mm-hmm. If you are a intermittent faster already and you still have some weight to lose, then we want to add in that fasting effort during the day while doubling down or making sure that we're keeping this earlier dinner time before bed kind of as one of our staples of our foundational day-to-day habits.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this group was somewhere in the 14 to 16 hour fasted range. So, just again, a shout out to having your foundational fasting time where, I'm a faster, this is how I fast. And every day I can rely on this fast at least for kind of structure for my day. And what that means for you, a 14-hour fast or a 16-hour fast, and you can always add on to that. But that being as your baseline means that you're getting a hold over your cardiometabolic risk factors, but you're also gaining control over what happens with your energy levels and your motivation and your cravings the next day. And then that's going to reflect on control over what's happening with the scale. And if you have some more weight that you want to lose, some more fat that you want to burn through, then you can always add on from there. Yep. But guess what makes it easier to add on to? It makes it easier when you have had a good night's rest, when you've had a greater HRV, heart rate variability, and lower blood pressure, lower stress over your sleep cycle, and then you wake up feeling more refreshed the next day. Cravings are lower. It's so much easier to, maybe turn tomorrow into a burn day where you're just burning through the whole day, or
maybe a full fast day, right? Yeah,
full fast day, or maybe it's a late lunch, and then you springboard into a flame day that next day. So I mean, you can really take these things and really just leverage them, just based on a couple of small levers to pull.
Yeah, so where we started the conversation today is really like all the findings highlight the potential of this sleep-aligned TRE strategy really as a feasible non-pharmacological intervention for cardiometabolic disease risk reduction, right? So better cardiovascular health. And I love that this study was in middle-aged and older adults, right? The people that as we age, the scale keeps ticking up, right? The obesity epidemic, 75% of the population is overweight or obese. Right. Like, so it's speaking to us as the masses, right? And I love the simple lever. So Tommy, I love the conversation today. I love the action steps today. I think it's going to be really impactful. Love to hear your feedback on the episode. Reach out to us, send us a message. If you're looking for more guidance, head to the show notes, grab one of our resources, grab the Blueprint to Fasting for Fat Loss, join one of the upcoming challenges, send us a message if you got a question. But appreciate you, man. Until next time. Let's protect those 3 hours before bed, extend that overnight fast, and keep taking bold, simple steps to reclaim your cardiometabolic health and maybe get some weight loss benefits too. So
love it.
Till next time, man. Appreciate you. Thanks for the conversation. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye. So you've heard today's episode and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.